Sandra. Maybe I'll just say a few words about the framework for this conversation, which is that it is featured within the spring edition of the magazine Skolefri, an edition which has a focus that is literacy. And looking into what is literacy? What do we mean when we say that word? What do we mean when we say we need to make sure that our kids don't become illiterate, for instance? People use these words, and what do we actually mean? Maybe you would like to say a couple of words about, like, how did you end up unschooling your 3 kids?
I was pregnant with my third when the first one was taking 2 little classes, an art class and a dance class, and they didn't go well in 2 different ways. And I thought, he's not ready for kindergarten, and kindergarten was required. So I knew other people who were homeschooling, and I just found out how to stay home. And I wanted to unschool right away because I knew about it, although we had thought he would go to school. But we thought we can do this for 1 year and it'll be easy. He can either go back to school as kindergarten or first grade. So it was no pressure on us. And then we figured our other 2 kids would go to school, but they didn't. They, one by one, as they came school age, decided to stay home too. So it was all very gradual for us and easy. And so we unschooled from 1990 till now. I mean, there was no ending date. We thought when they're 18, then they graduate. But as they got older, it didn't feel that way. They just got older, went to jobs, did things, got married.
Okay, so it was more like a gradual sliding into it and not actually like a choice that you knew beforehand you were going to do.
We didn't plan it before when they were babies. It just happened gradually, but we didn't slide into unschooling. That was solid from the beginning.
All right. Okay. So your kids are all in their 30s now, right? Did they then all turn out like, are they literate?
Yeah, no, because people who are around language learn to read. They learn to understand what's going on. They ask questions. They learned so much before they could read that surprised me, because I had grown up thinking or being told that all the learning humans did was in books. You had to learn to read so you could learn. And then I started seeing how much people can learn without reading. So I wasn't worried about it at all. But they all read early. Holly read the latest of all, but by the time she could read, her vocabulary was really big. And
yeah, so I know that just before we started, you told me that you had done some research and looking into the term of literacy. Do you maybe want to share what you found out?
Yes, I do. Illiterate was a word. The way dictionaries and all of that sort of thing, etymologies work, is they look for the earliest use of the word in writing. It was a long time ago, like 400 years ago, that literacy, the illiterate, was used in writing, that someone be illiterate. And at first it meant didn't read Latin. And then the next time it was English. But literacy itself didn't come around until the late 19th century. So 150 years ago, the term literacy started being used. In the 20th century, when I went to school in the middle of the 20th century, sort of the glory days of the American public school systems, there were books, there were certain things, books, poems, that everyone was expected to know. Everyone was expected to at least vaguely know Bible stories. They didn't teach them in school, but they assumed that you would pick it up somewhere, that you would know things like Adam and Eve, Jonah and the whale, Noah's Ark. And so that if people made reference to those things, you had a vague idea what they were talking about. It makes a shorthand for conversation if people have a shared body of knowledge. So they called that common knowledge. And school was supposed to present that. So there were certain stories and even songs in school that everybody knew, all the kids knew. But by the 1970s, that was starting to be criticized. Like, why are we reading this book and not all these other books? Because more and more things were being written. Common knowledge wasn't so common, and it started being criticized politically. And then it wasn't international either. What kids read in England or Canada wasn't the same as what kids were reading in the United States. In the 1970s, movies started to be taken more seriously, because up to then, for one thing, all the cameras had to be plugged in. So most of the movies were inside a building, or they couldn't go outside and have airplane shots and stuff like they could later. So movies got better, and there was still a prejudice, like, well, I saw the movie, that's not good, you had to read it in a book. But one of the first things that broke that prejudice was Shakespeare, because it was never meant to be read in a book. Nobody was ever supposed to have the script but the actors. So for years, there was people would read Shakespeare because they didn't live where there was where there were actors, where there was a theater. But then when movies came along, it's like, wait, we can watch Romeo and Juliet, we can watch Hamlet, done by real actors. And now that movies are better, it's not even limited to a set. It's not looking like you filmed a play. They're going in and out of buildings, they're outside. So then people couldn't argue anymore that the book was better than the movie. And that might have been part of what broke the prejudice. And so movies got so much better because what movies have is costumes, film scores, beautiful cinematography. You can hear different accents that you might not know to read when you're reading it. The prejudice remained, though, that any media outside of books was inferior. It was pop culture. It wasn't real. It wasn't what you're learning. But as time went on, they went, okay, what's the purpose of reading that book? To get the ideas, to know the story. And so then it's just as good as if someone else read it to you or if you saw a movie. And that prejudice is still not completely gone. There came to be not only common knowledge about books that everyone was expected to know, vaguely at least, but movies. And in the past week, I have heard references to Groundhog Day, Singing in the Rain, Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, Star Wars, and Harry Potter. Like just casually in conversations, and when I knew we were going to talk about this, everybody will just say, and they're not saying, let's talk about Harry Potter. It's like, like in Harry Potter, blah, blah. And they go on. And I did know because I knew these movies. And when my kids would be in a situation like that and someone would reference a movie, they'd go, what movie is that? And they go watch it. And I think a lot of people do that. If they find that they're missing some references in a conversation, they'll go find it. When Holly was little, she's our youngest. When she was really little, 3 or 4, she started watching a movie a lot, and it was called Stand By Me. It was based on was a novella, so a long short story by Stephen King. And Holly knew that because she paid, as she got older, she watched that show for years. And one day her older brother, who was about 5 at the time, ran into the living room in the morning and he said, Mom, please don't let Holly watch Stand By Me today, because we had just one TV in the front room. And I said, I'm sorry, Marty, she really likes it. We'll find something for you to do outside. And it's an odd story because it's not about little girls. It's not, there's one dog, and I was going to say no girls and no dogs. There is one dog, but it's a mean guard dog that wants to bite their balls. And that didn't bother Holly at all. And it's about some young boys going to find a dead body that is reportedly that a kid got hit by a train and his body's still out there. They haven't found it. So these kids go down the train tracks one day for an adventure to see if they can find it. But Holly just loved the story. She loved this, had a lot of 50s rock and roll, and she still to this day loves 50s rock and roll. That's probably where she picked it up first. So for Holly, she was getting a lot of information and reference out of it. Then when she finally learned to really read, she was 11. I was a little worried because I always thought girls learn easier than boys, and the boys had read earlier. But when she helped a friend of hers read a Judy Blume book. And those are already aimed at 12-year-olds, I think, about that reading level. She helped her friend finish it. Holly couldn't read it all at the beginning. The friend was a struggling reader, and Holly was just helping her so they could play because she had to read a chapter a day or something like that. So Holly's trying to help her. In the course of trying to help her, Holly figured out how to read. That other girl still wasn't getting it. She said she doesn't think that other girl ever finished, but Holly did. And then Holly read another book by that author. And then she said, Mom, Stand By Me is based on a Stephen King book, right? And I said, well, yeah, it's in a collection. She said, can we get that? And she started reading it. She would come and read me things. She knew all these words, not from the movie, just because she had been around in conversations with older people and adults her whole life, with having older brothers and their friends coming over. She wasn't just hanging around with kids her age or younger. So her vocabulary was big, and she was very interested within that story. It's a story of an author, by an author, about an author. So in the movie, it's the narrator is the writer, and in the book, he says, when I was 14, I wrote this, and there's a story that they had acted out in the movie. So Holly did two important things. She came and talked to me about how Stephen King had written as a kid. So he did kid writing story. She was really interested in the differences between his narration and the stories that the kid wrote. I might not even notice that if I had been reading it, because I was reading fast, school style, fast to get it over with, fast to get the major ideas so I could take a test. But Holly wasn't in a hurry. So she was very analytical. And the other thing she did was she would discuss with me every time she came to a part. She'd say, I know why they couldn't film this. why they didn't put this in the movie. It wouldn't have worked. When I was a kid, I would always read the book first because that was virtuous. That's what literacy was. That's what good people did, was read the book first and then go watch the cheap movie they should never have made anyway. Because I just grew up around that much prejudice about how books were wonderful, books were it. And everything else was what you can do maybe if you finish reading, like the dessert to the liver and onions of books.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, like you said, that prejudice is still there. Like, it's still reigning, because I think that's part of why people are so worried about, because reading is part of the big three, right? Reading, writing, and doing basic arithmetics. That's what people are generally worried about, or it's on their mind a lot. And I think the reading and writing part is because of that, because it's still considered more virtuous to read a book than to watch a movie, or even reading material still is graded, I think. Like, it's better to read a book by, some famous author or something than to read a comic book or something else. Like, that's lower in the hierarchy.
Graphic novels are the halfway between movies and books.
Yeah.
So that's considered like a cartoon too, but they can put so much more information in there.
And it's interesting because I think one of the things I'm getting from your story here is that you are actually talking about how Holly became literate.
There was so much more to what she was doing when she read that story than most people, especially if they only read the story.
Yeah.
Because she had pictures in her head already of a place, of the distance, of the time it would have taken them to do that, of the fear that they would have had. That wouldn't show in the book.
Yeah.
They can't show emotion in words as well as a person can act it. And yet people still say the value of reading is that children can use their imaginations. Well, when I read Oliver Twist, I couldn't imagine England in the 1850s. How am I going to do that in Albuquerque? How are kids who live in New Mexico or Texas going to imagine Paris? They can't. But if you see a movie, that's better. When I watched Heidi when I was little, they showed Austria, they showed the Alps, they showed houses, they showed them eating cheese that was wrapped in cloth, things that I could not have imagined. I would have imagined it wrong. Holly's analytical power, her analytical ability was way better. And when I was a kid, I would read the book first, then go watch the movie and be angry. It's like they didn't put everything in, they did it wrong. But Holly calmly said, here's why the movie's different than the book. She was 11. Most adults haven't thought much about that still. They just get cranky that it didn't match the book. So Holly, ever since then, has tried to watch the movie first, then read the books. Literacy went from can read and write to can read and write the things we think are important to, in the 1980s, an author named E.D. Hirsch wrote a book called Cultural Literacy. So he was talking about common knowledge, but he was upping it a little bit to say, if a culture doesn't have a common base of knowledge, they lose their culture. That's what culture is. So people were mad at him for saying, here's what ought to be on the list. And, it was controversial and it got talked about a lot. In the 90s, people started calling everything literacy because of E.D. Hirsch. So they started talking about computer literacy. That was even before the internet, but just how to use a computer, or computer literate. And then the term numeracy, that meant, are you getting good at math, was changed to numeric literacy. And all kinds of fields came up: media literacy, financial literacy, consumer literacy. So now they're just using the word to mean conversant in a field.
Yeah, to be able to use that tool or whatever. Yeah.
But they stole the word literacy, which really means letters, which really means you can read and write.
Yeah.
So now we're 500 years past when it first started being, when they accused anybody of being illiterate. Oh, my son Kirby told me a story. I told him I was going to be asked about literacy and that it was kind of a confusing and bigger topic than I had thought. And he's a gamer. He's been a gamer since he was little. When he was 13, he volunteered at a gaming store near here. He used to fold their flyers and do things for them. And then they hired him when he was 14. As soon as it was legal to hire him, they hired him. When he was 16, he was old enough for the insurance to let them give him keys to the shop. I mean, he just pretty much grew up in there. And so he would run tournaments, and he was so involved with a lot of games of Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, those kinds of table games. So he was saying, I kind of knew, but he said gamers had a shared knowledge and trivia and humor and terminology even before the internet, before web pages, because they had email. So by email, they'd exchange things, and they would get magazines like Nintendo Power or Pro Gamer. I don't remember the name of that one. And they would read about the games and about who designed them, who did the music. So they knew all these things that nobody else needed to know. But they cared, and they exchanged that information among them. Then the internet came along, and a bunch of them started making web pages so that you could come and find that information. And that's how they were learning about that. There was no class in school about how to be a gamer. When he talked about humor, I remembered a lot of humor that I got because I hung around with gamers. You know, I got these jokes. And I remembered when I was teaching English in the 1970s, I was very young, and I was teaching ninth graders who were 14 and 15 years old. And we were reading a script of Romeo and Juliet. It was more like a movie script than straight out of Shakespeare. So it was a little simplified and shortened. And so we passed out parts, and just sitting at the desks, they're reading through it. And after a while, one of the kids asked a question that I myself had asked when I was a kid, which is, what is this good for? And I thought, okay, give a good answer, because you have asked that question yourself. And I thought for a minute, and I said, to get more jokes. And I was so glad I had said that, because it's true. For the rest of their lives, when people talk about Romeo and Juliet, they'll get it.
Mm.
And a lot of times it is jokes or a parody, some kind of humor based on something that people know. So I like that answer, and I've used it a lot since for unschooling. Why, if kids are getting jokes and if they can understand or create humor about something, then they understand it pretty well. You don't have to ask them anymore all those questions like, did you understand the meaning? What about comparison contrast? Can you analyze this? Yeah, no, they're doing it.
That's interesting, because like you can be part of the community and you can be part of something via different ways. Even if you didn't learn how to read, you could still be part of, like, because we talked just before about watching a movie or listening to a story or something, like there are other ways to gain this body of knowledge, to get these common references. It's just interesting because, yeah, what's the whole point? Like, why do we want our kids to learn these things? Why do parents worry about will they learn, and what is it they are worrying about really? Because the whole thing about, oh, will my kid learn to read? I don't see that not happening, because reading is like a basic tool in our society. There are all sorts of situations where it's handy to be able to read. So it's the tool that is used, and kids naturally, they want to like master the tools that they see used in the society that they are part of. And obviously when they feel they're relevant and that they need them. So to me, being in a society where the written word takes up so much space, I don't really see that as a danger. Like I can't worry about it. It's like they will learn to read.
I think it gradually happens. I think there are certain things in brain development. Some people sneak up on it, and some people read groups of words or whole words, and some are very phonetic and sound out everything. It's really different. I think if anyone listening has a child who isn't reading yet, I've known of 3 unschooled kids who didn't read until their teens. One was a preemie, like really had a slow start on language and speaking anyway, but when he started reading, he was reading adventure novels. It wasn't kid stuff. He just went straight to that. And, you know, spy novels and stuff, mysteries, whatever. I talked to a girl who learned to read when she was 15. She said she always wanted to, but it didn't snap, and then it did. In 1998, there was a book published by a man named Frank Smith. It's called The Book of Learning and Forgetting. And he talks about how people learn, how people don't learn, and why some things stick with us and some things don't. And one of the things he mentions about it sticking is humor or being unusual or unexpected. If something seems out of place, it's easier to remember than something that's blah, 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 part of the background. So school makes everything blah, 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 part of the background. And it's hard to learn like that. But in regular life, you can learn things because you're surprised by something, and that's very valuable. He also said, if you want to learn a thing, or if you want to do a thing or be a thing, hang around with the people who are doing that. That's how you learn it, by being in that group.
I'm just thinking about something else, because it's something that parents will bring up every now and then. You know, the what if scenarios, or like, you know, all those if I let them scenarios. And one of them would be, because someone would say, so that's all fine and good and watching movies and that led to reading, but what if it didn't? What if it hadn't? What if Holly had never wanted to read the book, you know, the virtuous book after?
Could have been doing something else. Maybe she would have been cooking. I don't know what she would have gotten interested in, but she was a kid who was interested in a lot of things. The boys just learned to read mostly from video games and magazines about video games, players' guides, and they went on to read novels. I wasn't paying as much attention to them because Holly was the youngest and she talked to me all the time. So I know more about the details of Holly's reading.
So you mentioned that you had been a little bit worried or slightly just thinking about, oh, it's a little bit late, maybe something about Holly reading a little bit late.
It surprised me.
And I'm using quote unquote marks because I don't, the term, you know, being a late reader or an early reader anyway, I don't really fancy those terms, but
It's harmful.
what?
It's harmful.
Yeah, obviously,
Think about someone like that.
yeah, it is. And I'm just forgetting what I wanted to say with that.
That
Oh
people
gosh.
are worried. The other people who are listening might be worried that it might not happen.
Yeah, I think people are. And then yeah, now I know. I was just thinking, were you then actively like doing things to try to like support, stimulate, help make the thing happen?
I didn't want to. We played a game with sticky notes. Like I would put a name like 8 things in a room and put the sticky notes on the wrong things for the kids to arrange. That was a game we just played when they were little. It wasn't important reading. It was just a game and they could help each other. So if it's, you know, it would be like lamp, chair, TV, and I would put them on the wrong things. And then they would rearrange them. They would discuss it. Oh, I don't think that says chair. It starts with a C. And they go, yeah, but none of the other ones are chair. So sometimes they would just figure it out like that. It was more like a puzzle. But no, I didn't teach read. I didn't want to teach reading. I tried with my oldest 3 times and he cried. I quit forever. I mean, that was when he was 6. And I wanted him to read so my mother-in-law would hush. But I just decided to ignore my mother-in-law about it. And that was way better. And he learned to read within a year and a half of that anyway, on his own and happily.
Yeah.
When people used to call other people illiterate in the 1600s or whenever, you know, it just meant you're stupid. That's all it meant, really. And in those days, if someone was literally illiterate, couldn't read, it's probably because they had no exposure, because they lived in a place without books and didn't go to school. So they weren't even seeing books. What are they going to learn to read with? But as you said, our kids are surrounded by signs and all kinds of print everywhere they go. When public school came along and everybody's made to go to school and it's a giant factory where they go in at, you know, here and they come out finished. Some of them come out messed up. And illiteracy now, if someone's illiterate now who went through school, it's because when they were little, they were treated like illiterates, like you're stupid. You can't read, so you're going to fail school. If you don't learn to read by the time you're 8, I can't believe you can't read yet. And those people can become illiterate in a hard way, in a resistant and ashamed way. And that's what unschooling cannot provide. Unschooling parents need to be careful not to do any of that, because that way children can blossom like a plant and learn to read in a peaceful, natural, whole way, in their own way. So it's probably better for the parents not to try to teach if they want to be unschoolers. If they don't try to be teachers, they're taking the same risks that school takes. They might make that child afraid of math. They might make that child hate history. My air quotes are up. They might make them hate history because they tried to teach them history. And a kid who would have been totally interested in the history of Egypt got mad because they were trying to teach them how their country was founded and a bunch of stuff they don't know or care about. Holly was playing a game called, when she was little and wasn't reading, she was playing a video game called Harvest Moon. It's about farming, but she couldn't read. And so I was making her some little menus with pictures. You have to combine foods to make a medicine or whatever. So I would draw pictures for her. And I was doing it on the computer, using little images, and then two of these plus one of these. And she was reading those charts. And sometimes she would just ask me, what does this say? And I would read it to her in front of her, but I wasn't going, this says this because of this. I wasn't being teacherly. I was just reading to her. My husband's good at math and I'm good at spelling and writing, which he wasn't when he was younger. He got better as he got older. But when we were in our early 20s, we were hanging around. If I wanted to know something, if I couldn't remember, I'd say, what's 12 times 15? He would just tell me the answer. We made a deal. I will just tell you and not shame you and not explain it if you will just tell me from the other end. So if you asked me to spell something, I wouldn't say committee. It has 2 M's and 2 T's. I would just spell it. No lesson. No, I told you last week. Nothing like that. And so when our kids came, it was really easy for us to do that for them because we'd already practiced with each other for years of if somebody's not good at something, just answer the question. And now people can ask Siri. And someone knew that her daughter was learning to spell, and she said, how did you know how to spell that word? And she said, I asked Siri. So the mom pictured that. She said, Siri, how do you spell this word? And Siri said, spell, 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 spell. What she did was she said, Siri, how do you spell this word? So that Siri would come up on the phone, and then it showed her question. She just got it from there. Kids now don't need the same kind of help my kids needed in the 1990s. That's fine, but it's hard for the parents to relax away from their expectations and experiences to say it's different now. So that book, the Book of Learning and Forgetting, was some of my first good exposure to be around the people who know what you want to know. But my friend Bree Jontry just told me yesterday of a linguist named John Swales. He came up with an idea that he calls discourse communities, which means groups that exchange information. So the same way that Frank Smith had said, be with the people who know what you want to know, John Swales says there are discourse communities who have shared language. So like that thing that Kirby told me about gaming culture, that's exactly what this guy was talking about later. He said they have communication within the group with shared goals. So they all have the same interests and specialized vocabulary, check, multiple genres of communication. So it's not just written word, it's also audio, visual, things. So there will be movies or videos that they know, that they need, that they use. And then I thought of unschoolers. They'll know who they might want to read or what website they might want to go to. They'll just kind of know because they hung around with other people who recommended it. I'm about to move to our old house. My middle son is moving to Alaska. And I'm going to stay in that house until they decide if they love it or not. As I'm leaving, I'm looking around. I have so many books that none of my kids will know or care about. And they don't read books anyway. They read on Kindle or whatever they're doing online, ebooks. And it used to be, I was telling somebody that who was looking at my videos. And I said, it used to be that when you went to meet somebody, you met somebody, you went to their house, you saw their bookshelf, you would see what books they have, or you would see their record collection, you see what records they have. And then later on it was videotapes or DVDs, but you go in, you see what they have. Now you can talk about it. You can tell by looking at what they know that you know. And that was another way to see common knowledge between two people. It's like, oh, I read that book. Or I would go into somebody's house and go, oh, they love medieval history. And I don't know how that will pass because you can't look at people's Google search history, to see what they're interested in. Another thing that's about literacy that people now don't have or know is handwriting. The last few times I've been asked to sign something, it was an iPad and it was use your finger. Like, what? This is like writing in frost on a window. This is not how handwriting should be. Because I have pretty handwriting, but I didn't learn to write with my fingers straight out, except playing on windows and mirrors where they didn't want you to. Next time the shower fogs it up, you see what you wrote. So that's kind of lost. My kids will never see, they'll never know. Like I knew, my mom drank too much, and I could tell when she wrote me a letter or a note if she was drunk when she wrote it or not. Or somebody was angry, they're pushing real hard on the pen, and it looks different on the paper, right? And it's just all this information that we had, that we knew, common knowledge, that's lost, but new things are coming and we need to figure out what they are. I don't really need to figure out what they are because I'm old, but parents who are currently with kids in the house should let go of their older expectations. Like, you have to learn to have beautiful handwriting because you'll be asked to sign things. Yeah, probably not. Probably pretty soon it's going to be thumbprint on an iPad or retina scan or something, really. So literacy has changed. The things that even late 20th century people thought, this is what I need to know for life, that's what they needed to know for the next 10 or 20 years. All kinds of things started be calling literacy, including, I just found spiritual literacy. I was looking up to see how silly is it going to get spiritual literacy. Now there's emotional literacy, and I thought emotional literacy must be the newest. So I went to look and I thought, what did a literate used to be? And I thought farming. But now there's farm literacy and agricultural literacy that they're teaching at universities around where I am in Colorado and California, Arizona, and Texas. So that will come along. But what literacy seems to be in all of these things is communication, interpretation of that topic or field, analysis, critical thinking, being analytical about whatever it is, whether it's movies or books or stories or music. Knowledge sufficient, this is a good phrase that my friend Bree gave me. Knowledge sufficient to discern whether a source is valid. So that kind of critical thinking. You're reading in your field of interest, and you look at something like, does this guy know what he's talking about? Is this a good source for us? Integration of that information into your life. So literacy might not be any good if you can't take it in and do something with it. Plato said, that Socrates said, that Socrates didn't like that people were learning to read and write. He thought, if you can read something, you will have too much confidence that you know it. But if you have to learn it orally, through your ears, hearing it, you'll really learn it. You'll really hear it. You'll listen more closely. You'll be able to repeat it, because they had that whole Greek oratory history going, that you make a speech or you tell a story and somebody else repeats it the next day the same way. And he said, with writing, that'll be lost. And he was right, because it was one skill that they had that they didn't need anymore. So there's all kinds of literacy, but that's what it means, is learning and sharing within a group in their own way. And that person taking that group and learning what they want to from that. So if someone asks an unschooler, what about literacy? Take a deep breath and say, what do you mean by literacy? If they say reading and writing, you go, okay, yeah, they'll learn to read and write. Those critics and skeptics may not know what they're asking, but the unschoolers could say learning how to learn is what that means. Literacy is being analytical and learning how to learn more. And that's what unschooling is all about.